Welcome to Reproduction 3, the estrus cycle. First, some definitions. As far as the term estrus, it is the time when the female is receptive to the male. This may vary by species. Generally, it's 5 to 18 hours in cattle of a 21-day estrus cycle. In horses, it may be for 3 to 4 days of a 20-day estrus cycle. So the estrus cycle is the period between estruses. So the estrus cycle is controlled and initiated by hormones. A hormone is a message from one organ to another organ of the body to tell that organ to take a particular action. So to initiate the estrus cycle, things start with the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus releases a hormone, GnRH. GnRH is gonadotropin releasing hormone. And the target is the anterior pituitary. It tells the anterior pituitary to release two other hormones, FSH or LH. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone. The source was the anterior pituitary gland. Its target is the ovary, and it causes follicular growth. The other hormone released from the anterior pituitary gland at a different time depending upon other signals from the body, and LH or luteinizing hormone also has an effect on the ovary, but it has an effect if we have a mature follicle there. So it causes that mature follicle to rupture and we have ovulation. The ovum or egg comes out of the follicle and goes down into the oviduct. Estrogen is another hormone very important in the estrus cycle. The source of estrogen is the ovary, and especially if we have a mature follicle on the ovary, we get really high estrogen levels. And there are a couple of targets for that estrogen during the reproductive cycle. One target is the uterus. It gets the uterus ready for pregnancy by increasing the blood flow to the uterus, increasing the thickness of the uterine lining. The second target of estrogen is the hypothalamus. In the hypothalamus, under the influence of high estrogen level, will cause the animal to exhibit estrus behavior. And this estrus behavior is going to be attractive to the male and cause the female to be receptive to the male's advances. Another very important hormone is progesterone. The source is the ovary, as long as we have an active corpus luteum on the ovary, or CL. And another name for the CL is the yellow body. Progesterone will have an effect on a couple of different organs. One is the uterus, and you need a high progesterone level throughout pregnancy to maintain that pregnancy in the uterus. The other organ is the hypothalamus. As long as we have high progesterone levels, the hypothalamus does not release GnRH. So without the release of GnRH, we don't have FSH, we don't have LH released. The whole system is more or less static. And during pregnancy, you don't want a lot of things going on. You want things to be quiet as that uterus is nurturing that embryo and fetus. Okay, final hormone here, very important in regulating the estrus cycle, is prostaglandin. The source of prostaglandin is a non-pregnant uterus. So if the uterus is not pregnant during the estrus cycle, it releases prostaglandin. Prostaglandin has an effect on the CL. It causes the CL to regress. As the CL regresses, progesterone level goes down. We no longer have restriction of GnRH release. GnRH is then released and the whole cycle starts over again. Here we have a diagram of what's happening during the estrus cycle. On the top we have a diagram of the structures on the ovary. So we have the corpus luteum, and we have the developing follicle, which is the solid line. As far as the dashed line, we'll see here that the corpus luteum is now regressing, and this box here is estrus. After estrus, we had ovulation, and then at the place where we had ovulation, we have a corpus luteum developing. And notice the path of progesterone down here, this dashed line, this progesterone, it follows pretty much exactly the growth and regression of the CL. All right, the other thing we have here is the developing follicle. So here we have a very mature follicle right before ovulation. And you'll notice the estrogen level kind of follows along with that developing mature follicle. All right, so what else is happening here? On the bottom we have the days of the estrus cycle. It's about 21 days, and so we have this CL here. We have high progesterone levels. At about day 15, the uterus will figure out that it's not pregnant and we need to get the cycle going again. So at about day 15, we'll get a prostaglandin spike. All right, so this is prostaglandin here, and that is a message from the uterus that, hey, we're not pregnant. And that prostaglandin spike will have an effect on the CL on the ovary. It will cause the CL to regress. Progesterone levels go down. The hypothalamus will release GnRH. The GnRH will cause the anterior pituitary gland to release FSH. It will cause this follicle to develop and go to maturity. We have the high estrogen levels here, which will make the animal exhibit estrus. We've got that mature follicle. We're going to get LH released from the anterior pituitary gland, and that release of LH is going to cause ovulation. Mature follicle goes down, estrogen levels goes down. We had ovulation. If we've got sperm there waiting for the egg, the animal may become pregnant. At the time of, at the place of ovulation, we get a CL that grows and matures, and we get active progesterone. So we have high progesterone level. If the animal is pregnant, that progesterone level will stay high throughout pregnancy. If the animal isn't pregnant, then at day 15, we'll have that prostaglandin spike again, and the whole cycle will start over again. Well, that's kind of the simplified version. The whole system's a little more dynamic than that, and then we have this 21-day estrus cycle. We'll get LH, FSH, actually a few different spikes, and then a bigger one here, and that LH will cause follicles to develop and regress. Follicles to develop and regress. And then the third wave of follicular development, you get that mature follicle here, and we get ovulation. And it's thought that these extra spikes along the 21 days is just to get the whole reproductive system primed for that pregnancy. So here's a diagram of or a picture of an ovary. So here we have the CL, an active CL. We've got follicles that are developing here. The CL may, this follicle may become a mature follicle if the CL regresses. Otherwise, these follicles are going to regress. So it's not, it's very common where you may have additional structures on the ovary than just one or two. This appears to be a place where maybe that's a location for an old CL. So this CL may have regressed back a couple of weeks ago, and it just kind of scarred area that will kind of heal over time. Just for review, we have structures on the ovary during the 21-day estrus cycle. So we're starting off here at day 0. The animal is exhibiting estrus because we have a mature follicle here that is producing a lot of estrogen. And the high estrogen level causes the estrus behavior. So this is the primary structure on the ovary at this time. We do have some immature follicles that will probably regress. You only need one that's going to go to maturity unless you have a litter-bearing species, and then of course you're going to have several follicles at maturity. Here we just have old corpus luteum that has regressed. Okay, we have ovulation and we go to day 1. So ovulation, here's the ovum, is going to be captured by the infundibulum and go down the oviduct. The old CL, you can see it's further regressed more. There's always a few immature follicles that kind of come and go. Okay, day 2 to 4, we've got a new corpus luteum being generated at the area of ovulation. And as this corpus luteum develops, it's going to start producing quite a bit of progesterone. Day 5 to 15, the CL, corpus luteum, is the main structure on the ovary, and it's producing a lot of progesterone. And as long as you have high progesterone levels, everything else is static. The hypothalamus is not releasing GnRH. The anterior pituitary gland is now releasing LH or FSH. Okay, day 19 to 20, evidently we had a prostaglandin spike from the uterus, so the CL is regressing. An old scar here from old corpus luteum, we call that a corpus albicans. But the CL is regressing, progesterone level goes down, the hypothalamus recognizes the low progesterone level and will release GnRH, which will cause the anterior pituitary gland to release LH, and we get the developing follicle. And takes us to the next step again with the mature follicle, and around the estrus cycle we go. Well, the species can vary quite a bit as far as timing of the estrus cycle and actions of the females during estrus, etc. So let's review. We've talked about cattle, duration of estrus, 8 to 20 hours, and can be quite a bit of variation. Can be as few as 4 hours and as much as 24 hours. Length of estrus cycle on average 21 days, but between individual cows it can certainly vary between 19 and 23 days. Time of ovulation is about 10 hours after the end of estrus. Okay, well let's go to sheep. Duration of estrus is 30 hours, a little over a day. Length of cycle just 17 days, but you notice for most of these species we're looking at about 3 weeks as far as length of the cycle, and they ovulate during late estrus. Horses, their duration of estrus is 4 to 8 days, and I'm really not sure why estrus would have to be that long. It makes it difficult in horses if you're doing artificial insemination, where you're trying to time the insemination so that it goes along with the time of ovulation. Length of cycle 22 days. 1 to 2 days before the end of estrus is when we have ovulation. So again, in horses, timing of insemination can be a little bit of a tricky proposition. Okay, pigs, duration of estrus 2 to 3 days, and they ovulate mid-estrus. So again, timing of that insemination can be a little bit difficult. What we generally do with pigs is we'll inseminate twice, 24 hours apart. So when the animals are first observed in estrus, we'll probably inseminate about 12 hours later, and then we'll come back and inseminate again 24 hours later, and hopefully kind of hit that mid-estrus ovulation time. Goats, very similar to sheep, as you see here. Length of estrus cycle a few more days, and ovulation a few hours after the end of estrus. Okay, rabbits are an interesting species here. Duration of estrus, about 13 days, and it's italicized here because the does do not show outward signs of estrus. To know if the doe is receptive to the male, you put the male in, or put the doe in the male's cage. The male will attempt to mount the doe. If the doe raises her hind quarters so that the rabbit can breed the doe, we know that she's receptive. If she stays hunched down and does not allow the male to breed her, we know she's not. And so the estrus cycle is 17 days, so if the doe is not receptive today, we'll probably put the doe back in with the male a week later, and then she should be receptive. And they're induced ovulators. So they get bred and then they'll ovulate about 8 to 10 hours later. So rabbits are receptive to the male about 2/3 to 3/4 of the time if everything's going correctly. Okay, cats are also induced ovulators in that their ovulation is stimulated by mating. They're in estrus for quite a period, 6 to 7 days. And the length of the cycle is 18 days. Okay, dogs are a little different in that generally they'll come into estrus once every 6 months. And they also have a long duration of estrus. So one of the hardest things about inseminating or breeding a dog is trying to time the insemination so that you're going to hit when we have ovulation. And that includes our little video on the estrus cycle. Have a good day.